We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Ches Amud Aleph from Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 38a. And the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing the opinion of Beis Hillel in the Mishnah. Beis Hillel in the Mishnah, they say that when it comes to carbon chatas as well, just like other carbonos, even one application is sufficient in terms of what's absolutely required. Just one application of blood is absolutely required. And the Gemara asked, where does Beis Hillel get this from? And the Gemara presented one idea, one source for Beis Hillel, which is from Karnos. It talks about the corners of the Mizbeach by carbon chatas, and it's written the word Karnos 3 times. 2 of the times it's written in singular, and 1 of the times it's written in plural. The way it's read is always in plural. So if you go by the way it's read, so it's written in plural 3 times, so you have a total of 6. If you go by the way it's written, so then you have a total of 4, because again, it's written in singular twice, and it's written in plural once, and the number between 4 and 6 is 5, and so therefore it's as if it wrote it 5 times, and we understand that therefore 4 of the times we're going to say that of the 4 times, of 4 of the applications, only 1 of them is repeated. And the halach is when something is repeated, then we say it's required. So we understand, again, applying to all 4 corners is a lechatchila, but just 1 is going to be absolutely required, because again, when we use both the way it's written and the way it's read, we look for the number in between. And so the Gemara asked on the previous summit, if that's true, we should say the same thing. Let's say by Sukkah, it says Basukos, Basukos, Basukos. It's exactly the same. It's written twice in singular and written once in plural. The way it's read is always plural, so we should say the total is 5. And we should say that there's a requirement of 5 walls when it comes to the Sukkah. And the Gemara continues and answers, Hasam over there, Chad Kra Kule Lagufe. One of the psukim is actually just needed for the halacha of Sukkah itself, that you have to sit in a Sukkah. V'chad L'suchacha, and then one of them is needed for the schach. And so therefore, even if you were to start with a number 5, you've already subtracted 2 of them. And so now you're down to 3. And Asoy Hilchesan comes along the halacha l'Moshe Misinai, v'gorata l'shlishas, and says that the 3rd wall, it doesn't have to be a full wall. V'yukimta tefach, it is sufficient. If it is just a tefach, that's how we learn out, again, the idea of 3 walls by a sukkah. Rashi explains, Hasam dal chad lagufe, take away 1, because again, for the mitzvah itself, pashlu arba, so then you're going to just have 4 left, v'chad l'schach, and then take away 1 for the schach, me'achar she'eschel l'foresh tavnisa, perish schach im dafnosa, again, we're talking about the schach with the walls over here, pashu telos, then you're going to be down to 3, and asoy hilchis shenemro l'moshe misinai, then the halacha l'moshe misinai comes along, v'gorato l'shlishis, and it says that you make the 3rd wall smaller, kach nemra halacha, that's the halacha l'Moshe Misinai sha'ashlishis dayeha betefach, that the 3rd wall, it's sufficient if it's just a tefach. Hainu detnan shtayim kilchasan shlishis afil tefach. That's what we learned. Again, the 3rd one can even be a tefach. And the Gemara continues and asks along the same lines, Elameata, again, if you're always going to take the reading and the way that it's written, so what about when it comes to a woman who's a yoledes, when it comes to a woman who just gave birth, it says v'tama shvuayim. It says that she's going to be tameh shvuayim. Shvuayim means 2 weeks. The full pasuk is v'im nekeva seiled v'tama shvuayim kinidasa v'shishim yom v'sheshas yamim teishav al dmei tar. It says for 66 days she will sit on the pure blood, but it says she's tameh shvuayim. It says she's tameh for 2 weeks kinidasa. Mentions the idea like a nida. And so the way it's written over there, it's actually written as shivim, as 70. So v'tama shvuayim, shivim, so you're going to read it as shvuayim, and it's going to be written as shivim 70. So it should be some number between 2 weeks and between 70 days, between meaning 14 days and 70 days. Ahani kra v'ahani masoris. Let's use both the way it's read and the way it's written. And our boim utrain boy, it's utrain boy l'mesav, she'll actually need to sit in tumah for 42, because if you take the number right between 70 and 14, it is the number 42. So that's the number that it should be. And the Gemara says to that, Shani Hasam, no, it's different over there. Dechsiv kinidas, it says like a nida, and so it has to be a number similar to nida. Nida is 7 days, so it would make sense that here it would be 14 days. Rashi explains, V'tama shavuayim shivim ksiv, it's written as 70. Neimonami ahani mesoris l'tefuye palga t'tosefes, so you should be, the mesoris, the way it's written, should help, we should say that again, it's going to add on half to whatever the number was, shivim l'tosefes shivim al shavuayim, whatever the halfway number is, but again, of 70 and 2 weeks, 14. V'ahani mikra l'vetsure palga, again, the way you read it takes away half, you're going to find the number in between is the point. Nimsis mosif al Shavuayim Chav Ches Chetz Yoshel Nun Vav. So it comes out, you start with the number 14, and you have to figure out how much to add. So the question is, what is 70 minus 14 to get that full difference? That's 56. And you cut that number in half, that's 28. So you're going to add 28 to 14. And again, 28 plus 14 is the number 42. That's why the Gemara had the number 42. So boy lemeisav yimei tuma yoledis nekev. Again, if a woman gives birth to a girl, she'll have to sit 42 days of tuma. And the Gemara then answered, Shani Hasam, it's different over there, because it's also written like a nida. That implies, or it's understood, that the pasuk is not talking about a number of days, elo leminyan shavuos. Rather, we're looking at this from the perspective of weeks. Shahanida shavua achas. A nida sits for 1 week. V'hayoledes shavuayim. And so then the idea is that the yoledes is 2 weeks. Shimat omer shivim. If you're going to talk about 70, hiflagta mitoras nida harve. Now you're really far away from the law of nida, which is 7 days. Aval kishat omer shvuayim. But if you talk about 2 weeks, so then karvasol toras nida. Then already it's close to the law of nida, so that would make more sense. And the Gemara continues, Vitana maisi la mehacha. Now the Tana of the Brisa, he learns it from over here. Rashi explains, Vitana de masnisa, the Tana of the following Brisa, lo maisi loha de Beisil Karev, when it doesn't have the source of Beisil's halacha, again, that by Karban Chadas, one application is required, the source is ela mehacha. Rather, the source is not like Rav Huna said, but the source is from over here. It is as follows. The pasuk says, V'chiper, v'chiper, v'chiper. It says v'chiper 3 times. Rashi explains v'chiber 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 b'seir nasi. It says it one time by the he goat of a nasi, useira v'kispa, and then it also says it by the female goat, karban chatos, the sheep, female sheep, karban chatos. Shakulan al hamizbeach achitz. And all of those are on the outer mizbeach, and it says v'chiber 3 times. Mipnei hadin, and the reason is because it could have been mipnei hadin means you could have learned it out. You could have had a limud. Rashi explains, "Mimnei hadin shechazar chalila," meaning you could have had a din. You could have gone back and forth in terms of how to derive it. Umalamed al achatos hachitzona shekol matanosem akvos. If you would have done that, it could have been that you're going to learn out that all of the applications of the blood by the outer chatos are required. Lakach nemru elu lahachshem chiser. That's the whole point of running the chiper, to say no. Even if you're missing some of the applications of blood, it is still okay. You could have learned out through the derivation we're going to see in a moment in the Brisa. You could have learned out they're all required, comes v'chiper, 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 and says they are not all required. And as the Brisa now continues and explains, sheyachol, that one might have thought, v'halo dinhu, that you can derive it as follows. Namru damim lamata, it says damim below, we'll see Rashi in a moment. V'namru damim lamal, and it says blood above. Ma matan damim ho'amurim lamata, shenesanan b'matana achas kiper, just like the blood below, one application is enough to atone. Af damim ho'amurim lamalo, shenesanan b'matana achas kiper, so to the blood above, one application is going to be sufficient. You could have learned that way. Oklach l'derech zuer, you could have went in another direction. Nemru damim bifnim, it mentions blood inside. This is talking about inside the mikdash. V'nemru damim b'chutz, and it says blood outside on the outer mizbeach. Ma damim ha'amurim bifnim, just like the blood inside the mikdash. That's the mizbeach ha'pnimi. Chiser achas min ha'matanos lo asav lo klum. If you're lacking even one of the applications of blood, it's nothing. Af damim ha'amurim b'chutz, so to the blood that's outside on the outer mizbeach. Chiser achas min ha'matanos lo asav lo klum. If you're missing even one of the applications, maybe it's nothing. That's the idea again that Rashi just mentioned, that all of them might be required. Nira lemi doma, we have to see which one's more similar. Which one should we learn from? Don in chutz mechutz, we should learn the outer from the outer. The ain don in chutz mepnim, and maybe we should learn the outer from the inner. Oklach l'derech zur, maybe go in the other direction. Don in chatos v'arba karnos, we should learn something that's a chatos and 4 corners. Mechatos v'arba karnos, from something else that's a chatos and all 4 corners. V'al yochiach chutz, and we shouldn't bring a proof from the outer mizbeach. She'ein chatos v'arba karnos, where it's not talking about a karmen chatos there, it's not talking about the 4 corners. So we don't know which way to go. Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says v'chiper, v'chiper, v'chiper. That's why it says v'chiper 3 times. V'chiper af al pi shelo nasan el shalosh, the first time, even if you just did 3 applications. V'chiper af al pi shelo nasan el shtayim, the second time, even if you just did 2. V'chiper af al pi shelo nasan el achas, and then v'chiper, even though only 1 application. That's how we know that 1 application is sufficient. And Rashi explains, V'halo dinhu, can't it be derived, l'hachshira b'matana achas, we can derive that just 1 application is good. Ukra lamali, what do we need the pasuk for? Namru damim lamata, the Brisa said that it says damim lamata, below. What does below mean here? Rashi says below over here means michut hasikra, it means below the chut hasikra, which was around the mizbeach. It was like a line on the mizbeach. Kol hadamim chutz mechatas. That really is talking about all applications of blood, all karbonos except for karban chatas. The blood is below. It's applied applied below the chut hasikra. That's why we mean we're deriving from other karbanos that are not chatos. V'nemru damim l'mala mechut hasikra, and also talks about blood that's applied above the chut hasikra on the upper part of the mizbeach. That's the chatos. That's the karban chatos. Ma tachtonim kippur b'matona achas. Just like by the lower application of the blood, one application is sufficient. T'chsiv, as it's written, v'dam zvachecha yishafich. It says v'dam zvachecha yishafich. Umiu chatos mehaikra lo yol. If Rashi notes, you can't learn karban chatos from that pasuk. To lo shaychi be lashon shvicha, because by chatos you can't use a language of shvicha, which literally means pouring. Kiyim zrika. You can only use a language of zrika shiba matnas etzba, because there you're applying with the finger to the mizbeach. Ela bebinyanav lomed min atachton. Just a binyanav, just like we find over there, we can say over here. Tiafu kippur b'matona achas. That also over there, we're going to say one application is sufficient. That's one option in terms of deriving by chatos. But you can also derive from bifnim, from the chatos, bechatos hapnimios. That's the karban chatos, is where you apply the blood to the inner mizbeach. You bring the blood into the Beis HaMikdash. Bachutz, and then the outer is bechatos hachitzonos. That's the karban chatos, where the blood is applied on the outer mizbeach. Lo asav lo klum. You can derive from the inner ones to the outer one. That again, it's nothing but pirkin yalfinan law. We're going to learn this out in the parak, that when it comes to the chatos hapnimios, all the applications are required. Chutz mechutz. Do you learn outer from outer, meaning chatos me'ola? That would be learning from a different carbon. The carbon chatos from the carbon ola. Don in chatos hachitzona shi chatos. Again, maybe you could argue that we'll learn the outer chatos, which is a chatos. Uchsib ba'arba karnos, and it also says the phrase four corners. Kemo shamarnu lamala, like we said above. Karnos mechatos hapnimis. We should learn that from the chatos hapnimis. Shehi chatos. That's also a chatos. V'nem ruba arba karnos. It also says arba karnos. Kidalakamon. Like we're going to say later on, Lamalahu Omer Keren Karnos Beparkoin Mashiach, Hareshtayim Lamato Omer Beparho Eda, Keren Karnos Arba. Again, we're going to mention all of that. And so the point is, which one should we learn from? Velo Yochiachotz. Maybe we should learn from the inner chatos and not from the outer karbonos, the shar damim, other bloods of other karbonos. Chutz velo nemer ben karnos, because over there again, it doesn't say karnos. And so again, the Gemara then said, the fact that the pasuk says v'chiper 3 times, that indicates that only one of the applications of blood is required when it comes to karban chatos. But the Gemara continues and asks, v'haimi boile legufe, but isn't the word v'chiper each time that it's stated needed for the context of the pasuk itself, to say that the karban is bringing a kapara, is bringing an atonement? And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rava says, Barada Mori Asabrali, Barada Mori explained it to me as follows. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, V'chiper v'nislach. It says it will be an atonement and it will be a forgiveness. Zuhi kapara, zuhi slicha. This is kapara, this is slicha, meaning they're the same thing. Kapara means atonement, slicha means forgiveness, it's the same thing. And so therefore, v'chiper really is an extra word in the pasuk. It's not needed legufe, it's not needed for the context of the pasuk itself. And that's why, again, we darshan those words to say that one application is sufficient. Rashi explains, Mi boile lagufe b'chol chad v'chad l'lamed choshekiper alachet. Isn't each one needed to talk about the idea of atonement for sin? And so again, the Gemara then said that v'chiper actually is extra because it already says v'nislach, it says forgiveness, and that's how we're able to derive it from the words v'chiper that are stated 3 times. But the Gemara continues and asks, Ema, but why don't we say v'chiper, that when it says the word v'chiper, afal pi shelo nasan elo shalosh l'malo v'yachas l'mata, maybe it's not saying that the application of the blood is not required, it's just saying it doesn't have to be at the upper part of the mizbeach. The first time it says v'chiper, it's saying that one of them can be on the lower part of the mizbeach, and then it says v'chiper a second time, afal pi shelo nasan elo shtayim l'mata u'shtayim l'malo, it's saying that even if 2 are applied on the lower part of the mizbeach, and 2 are applied on the upper part, that's okay. V'chiper, and then it says a third time, afal pi shelo nasan lamalo elo lamata, even if what he did was, he only placed it, he didn't do anything lamalo, he only did it lamata, maybe that's what v'chiper is saying. But the Gemara says to that, Amar Ravada bar Yitzchak, Ravada bar Yitzchak says, Imkain, if so, if that's what you would say, that it means to say that you don't have to do any applications on the upper part of the Mizbeach, so Imkain, if so, Bitalta Torahs Arba Karnos. Now you've completely nullified what the Torah said about the 4 corners, because the 4 corners of the Mizbeach represents the upper part of the Mizbeach, and so therefore, you can't possibly say that the V'chipers are saying that that's not required at all. But the Gemara then says, 1 second, but if that is what the Torah is saying with these words v'chiper, so live to learn. So that's exactly what the Torah is saying. The Torah is saying that we're nullifying it, and it does not have to be done on the upper part of the Mizbeach. And so the Gemara continues and says, Amar Rava says, Eizeu dover shetzarech shalosh, what kind of thing would need to be repeated 3 times? Have Omer elu karnos. So that must be referring to the corners, and Rashi here explains, Ema v'chiper avol l'makrinu legamri lo. Again, maybe the v'chipers are just saying it doesn't need to be the upper part of the mizbeach. We're not totally uprooting it. But the Gemara then said, Imkain, if so, the darshinan kiper afapishan esonan kulon lamatam and achut. If it means that it's a kapara, even though they're all done on the lower part of the mizbeach, bitalta Torah's karnos. Now you've annulled the law of corners, haksuva bechatos, which are written by chatos. V'alchinam ksibba karnos is for no reason that it says karnos. The hainu lamala, which means above. Uparchinam. But then the Gemara asks, Amar, the live to learn b'diavad mi v'chiper. Live to learn, if the Torah is saying that b'diavad, after the fact, it's not an absolute requirement. That's what we're learning from v'chiper. So let it be nullified. V'chi kasvinu lemitzvah kasvinu, and maybe again the reason why it says karnos is because lemitzvah lechatchila, it should really be done on the upper part of the mizbeach, but it's totally fine to do it on the lower part of the mizbeach. And then the Gemara answered, Ezo davar shetzarech shlosha, what needs shlosha v'chiper? Why would it need to say v'chiper 3 times? Haviomer elu karnos, that must be referring to the karnos, the corners, uchidamrinan, exactly like we said, the cholchad v'chad miet choda karen v'chiper, each one of those v'chipers is excluding one corner. V'kam le'akaren achas la'akev, and the idea would be you're removing one corner, and one of them is required. And what's the point of the Gemara? De'ike de ka'amrit, because if it's like you said, li'ashminan, to teach us the yoiv kulu lamata kosher, that if you're going to place them all below its kosher, so arba v'chiper havale lamichtav, then it really should have said it 4 times, lahachshir arba hamatanos lamata, because we're saying all 4 of the applications should be below. In other words, if the point over here is to say that there's no requirement that the applications of the blood be above, so then it should have said v'chiper 4 times. That's what Rava means when he says Eizeu davar shetzarech shalosh. Why would it be 3 times? That's just to remove the corners themselves. But the Gemara still continues and asks the question, Ema, but still say v'chiper afal pishalo nasan elo achas lamala v'shalosh lamata. This possibility wasn't yet mentioned, but why not simply say that it says v'chiper 3 times to say that one of them has to be above, but 3 of the 4 do not need to be above. They're not absolutely required, again, b'diavad, to be above. Even if a person just did 1 application above and 3 applications below, that should be sufficient. Maybe that's what v'chiper is actually doing. And to that the Gemara says, Lo matzinu damim shechetzion lamala v'chetzion lamata. We don't find bloods that they're applied half above and half below. And Rashi explains, Ve'ema v'chiper afal pishalo nasan ela achas lamala v'shalosh lamatan. Why not say that v'chiper means 1 needs to be above, 3 can be below? Ulachi lo ksivi arba. That's why it doesn't say it 4 times. Mishum dechada miya ma'akva b'lamala. Maybe 1 is required above. Utlos iskashri lamata, and 3 are going to be kosher if they're done below. Avula mikrenulo. But again, maybe we're not totally uprooting the requirement of all 4. And so again, the Gemara then said we don't find that sometimes some is done above and some is done below. But the Gemara continues and asks, V'lo, do we really not find Chetzion Lamala and Chetzion Lamata when it comes to blood? V'atanan, but we learned in a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Yuma, Hiza Mimenu, that he sprinkles from it, this is talking about the Kohen Gadol and the Kodesh Kadashim, Achas Lamala v'Sheva Lamata, 1 above and 7 below. So you see that we are splitting the blood, some above and some below. And the Gemara says to that, Kematzlif, over there, it's not really above and below, it's Kematzlif. As the Gemara now explains, my Kematzlif, what does it mean, Kematzlif? Machvi Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda indicated Kemenagdina. It's like somebody who's whipping when you're whipping, so in that situation, by Malchus, by lashes, it is Kematzlif, that's what that means. It's a little bit Lamala, a little bit Lamata, as Rashi will explain. And Rashi explains, Hiza mimenu midam pari Yom Kippurim b'seder Yuma. Again, this is from the blood of the bull of Yom Kippur. Achas lamala v'sheva lamata, 1 above, 7 below. K'dechsiv al pnei hakapores kedma. It says to the pnei, the face of the kapores. V'lefnei hakapores yazeh sheva pamim. It says you sprinkle 7 times. V'kosal gadaitach achas mechatzi ovir shel kapores lamala. Right now we think that one of the sprinklings is from the halfway point of the kapores upward. V'sheva mechatzi lamata, and 1 is from the halfway point downward. Umeshani, and the Gemara answers, answer is how kematzlif. There he's doing it kematzlif. Kidemeforish v'yazal, as the Gemara explains, kimenagdina means ka'adam hamake malkus arboim beritzu. It's like a person who gives 40 lashes with a strap. Zu lemata mizu besamach. It really is just one right below the other. Velosha kiven achas mechetzio lamala v'hashar mechetzio lamata. Has nothing to do with the idea that you're going to try to do one in the upper half and the others in the lower half. It's not having to do with the upper and lower half. It's just one right below the other. Now, the reason why it says that the one is distinct from the 7, if really it was just one straight below the other, so why is it 1 above and 7 below? It's really each one right below the next one. So le'inyan sidud yado katani, that just has to do with the way he's angling his hand. That's explained over there. When he's sprinkling above, he turns his hand below, he angles his hand downward, and then when he's sprinkling downward, he angles his hand upward. That's all that means. But the Gemara continues and asks, do we really not find domim chetzion lamala and chetzion lamata? What about the following Mishnah? This is also Mishnah Yuma. Hiza al taharo shel mizbeach sheva pa'amim. If he sprinkles on the taharo shel mizbeach 7 times. And Rashi explains, Hiza al taharo v'atanan hasam. We learned in a Mishnah over there, Hiza al taharo shel mizbeach hapnimi. They're talking about the inner mizbeach. Kedechsivi Hiza olav min hadam v'gomer, like it's written in the pasuk. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Ches Amid Beis.